Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other topics, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Smart water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. President Donald Trump lost a big one in court over the weekend when a federal judge blocked him from deploying the National Guard in Portland. After the state of Oregon sued, the judge found that Oregon was likely to prevail on the merits and issued a temporary restraining order. The judge also blocked Trump from deploying the California National Guard to Oregon, too. Interestingly, the judge cited Trump's own tweet, in which Trump declared that Portland was war-ravaged. The ruling declared that the president does not have absolute authority to simply invent facts on the ground as a pretext to justify any use of the military he wants. In other words, Trump's bad faith worked against him. Today we're discussing all of this with Oregon's Attorney General, Dan Rayfield. He's going to walk us through the ruling and what it really means. Attorney General, thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me.
So Trump moved to take over the Oregon National Guard, sent several hundred of them into Portland to defend ICE facilities from protesters. You went into court and Judge Karen Immergut awarded you a temporary restraining order. Then Trump tried to federalize the California National Guard and send it into Portland. California joined you and got that stopped as well. The court ruled, AG, that Trump exceeded his statutory authority with these orders. Can you explain the ruling and bring us up to date on where we are?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. If you think about it just as Americans, we don't see the United States military in our cities, and there's a reason for that, right? We have laws that prevent that, except under extreme circumstances. And the president was saying, hey, these extreme circumstances exist in the city of Portland, and we said, absolutely not. We presented real facts in the courtroom. The lawyers for the federal government presented true social facts in the courtroom, and it's pretty obvious to see why the judge sided with us. When you talk about real facts, the question becomes real easy, and it is those extreme circumstances don't exist for the military to be walking the streets of our city.
Well, to go into the guts of that, by law, Trump can only federalize the National Guard if there's an invasion by a foreign nation, a rebellion, or if the laws can't be executed with regular forces. The crucial thing, though, is that while the president has a fair amount of deference in determining whether those things are happening, he can't just make it up whole cloth. The judge cited a few examples of violence, but said this doesn't come close to reaching those conditions. Can you talk about the importance of that aspect of the ruling?
Yeah, and I think it's important for all of us to be grounded. We actually do want a rational president to have deference in being able to determine when there is an emergency that might necessitate the military, right? You wouldn't want to second guess a president. Is this an invasion or is this not, right? You want to give him a ton of deference to react immediately. What made this very unique is that right now, it's not even a close call. Right? It's just not a close call. You can give all the deference you want to the president, and just none of those circumstances exist. And I often joke, and I was like, the only rebellion going on in Oregon right now is when I try and feed my son a vegetable. So it's just a very strange dynamic. And the president is really just fixated on the social media gossip, which is incredibly reckless to rely upon when you're deploying the United States military.
Well, I want to try to get at Trump's bad faith in all this. The judge cited a tweet from Trump. After a period of really minimal activity outside the Portland ICE facility, Trump tweeted that he's directed the defense secretary to protect, quote, war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists, close quote. War-ravaged. The judge looked at that and said, Trump can't just make up facts on the ground, and said Trump was untethered from the facts. So, AG, didn't Trump's bad faith work against him here?
Well, unquestionably, right? I mean, but that's what is so amazing about our court system in the United States, right? It's a place we get to go in and talk about truth. We get to talk about facts, and we have a judge, no matter where they come from in life, gets to evaluate the circumstances on the ground and make these decisions. And it doesn't matter what the president says. You can say whatever you want, but you still got to be able to back it up with real facts, and to be able to push back against the president and say, hey, no, this is unacceptable is incredibly important. And I always kind of take these things back to like raising a child, right? You have to set boundaries for your child. And you have to set boundaries for your president. And that's the Constitution, and that's the laws of our country. And those boundaries are incredibly important. And if you don't enforce those boundaries, you're going to have a child that's going to run amok, or you're going to have a president that's going to run amok. And that's what the founders of our Constitution did not want, is too much power in the executive branch.
Right, and that brings me to Stephen Miller, because that's exactly what he does want. Stephen Miller erupted in fury a couple times on Twitter over this and other related stuff. He essentially said that the judge was an insurrectionist. Isn't the upshot of that basically that Miller wants the president to have absolute and unlimited deference to just simply declare that something is an emergency or whatever the trigger is, in order to bring in the military essentially whenever he wants for whatever purpose he wants?
Yeah, I mean, what Stephen Miller says is incredibly inflammatory, and it's incredibly short-sighted, because if you start expanding the power of the executive branch, those powers will be expanded for the next Democratic president. And they need to recognize the problem with that. It's not just a problem with a Republican president, it's a problem with a Democratic president. We have co-equal branches of government for a reason. And we don't want to start expanding that. And so I think this is the absurdity that Miller brings with him as he starts kind of going forward. Incredibly short-sighted.
Well, for sure. I want to ask, though, Attorney General, it seems to me that California joining your lawsuit suggests kind of a new direction all this could take, in which states really start banding together to fight back against what appears to be this kind of administration strategy of pitting states against one another. You probably saw, obviously, that the Texas governor essentially said, we're happy to send the National Guard to any blue area. That's not exactly how he put it, but that was the essence of it. Are there discussions underway among attorneys general from states like yours about where this is all going and what to do about it in a more collaborative way?
You know, as Democratic attorneys general, we talk all the time, and we talk about being ready and making sure that we are in a position to defend the rule of law immediately. It's why we had our lawsuit filed in less than 6 hours of having formal notice that he was trying to federalize the Oregon National Guard. The reason we brought California in is now the president added a new element, right? They added in the California National Guard. It was very important to have AG Rob Bonta in our case working with us, bringing forth some of these arguments. It's a weird place in this world where we start pitting conservative states against Democratic states and talking about using the military of one state, dragging them into another state, and the sovereignty of each state in our country. So it's a really new dynamic that we're experiencing together right now, which I think is incredibly important, that when we're talking, that we're speaking with one voice as Democratic attorneys general about enforcing that rule of law, making sure that people remember why the Constitution put these boundaries in place in the first place.
To stay up to date on all the news that you need to know, there's no better place than right here on the DSR Network. And there's no better way to enjoy the DSR Network than by becoming a member. Members enjoy an ad-free listening experience, access to our Discord community, exclusive content, early episode access, and more. Use code DSR2025 for a 25% off discount on sign up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Well, do you expect this to go beyond California? I expect the president to try and do this more with other blue state National Guards. Are you discussing with other attorneys general beyond California scenarios like that? What might they look like?
Yeah, I mean, we're ready for everything. What I would tell people to really start looking at and actually hearing the president, hear what the president is saying right now, what he's talking about. Every rally he goes to, yesterday, 250th anniversary of the Navy, what he's talking about is using the United States military as police in our communities, a police force within our communities to reduce crime. That is unlawful. That is un-American. And that is not the America that any of us grew up in. That is not the America that any of us were taught when we went through grade school. And so these are the type of things. Right now, it's about, hey, I'm just trying to protect a building. But what he's saying in court is vastly different than what he's saying at his rallies. And he's beginning this process of normalizing the use of the American military in our cities. And that can never be normal. And we have to fight to make sure that it is never normal. He started in California, D.C., Memphis. He's doing it in Illinois, Oregon. He's talking about it increasingly. And that's absurd. You know what we should be talking about? We should be talking about the healthcare they're trying to strip away. We should be talking about the food benefits. You know, all of a sudden, all this is going on, and we're not talking about the Epstein files anymore. Draw the attention away. It's like, I used to want to be a magician when I was a kid, and misdirection was always a key thing that we talked about when you wanted to be a magician. This is pure misdirection, and in a way that is an abuse of our Constitution or our laws.
Well, and in addition, it's actually going really further than just using the military as police. He's essentially talking about turning the military loose against Americans of the other party. In one of his speeches the other day, he said it straight out. He was talking to service members, and he said, I have a gnat on my shoulder with, the Democrats who supposedly want to let in the illegals. He said that to members of the armed forces. So isn't he really talking here about turning the military loose against fellow Americans?
I mean, it is not beyond reason that could be what he is thinking about, which is scary that that's even a possibility of the intent of the president of the United States. That's absurd. But you got to remember, it's like, look at it again, the totality of how this man leads. He leads through fear. He's talking about rigging our elections to maintain power in Congress. He has been threatening the free press in the United States, again, through fear. This is who this man is. This is not who America is. And that's why I think, again, we have to continue to push back against this. And again, it's this, what is his vision for America? That's not my vision. I don't want to live in this world where we're using tariffs as a regressive tax on Americans, or where we're sitting here and stripping people of essential benefits, health care, food assistance that they desperately need. That's not the America that any of us were raised in. And he's going a very different direction. And we have to wake up to this reality.
Well, I wonder whether, given all this, we could be hearing a little more from national Democrats about what's happening. Would you like to see something like a joint statement from congressional leadership, the party leadership, essentially saying that the entire party is united, and any Republicans who want to join, and that all these people, would you like to hear them say, we are all united against Trump's efforts to turn the military loose in American cities? Maybe something expressing more urgency from the party as a whole. Would you like to see that?
Yeah, I think we all have to say that. I think Republicans have to say that. It has to be unified from Democrats and Republicans. It has to be unified in community. This is something, that frankly seems so absurd. I mean, I can't even believe that we're talking about this. That's how absurd this is. Because it is so far-fetched, I don't think people are really grasping the reality of what's going on in America right now because it is so absurd. And I'm hopeful that we get a year out from now and we're not talking about this. But remember, we're not even 1 year into this man's presidency. And he is just beginning.
Absolutely. I would point out, though, that the Republican Party is all in with Donald Trump, so it is unfortunately left to the Democratic Party to communicate this. And I want to your point about how it's all so far-fetched that maybe people will have a little trouble, internalizing it or accepting what's happening. Maybe we do need to hear more from the National Democratic Party precisely for that reason, to drive home to people what's actually happening. What do you think of that?
Well, unquestionably. But let's also not forget some of the real positive things coming from some Republicans. So I do want to, throw some optimism in the world, right? Earlier this year, we had Supreme Court justices pushing back against the president, right? And as he was really attacking the independence of the judiciary. That's a good sign. Yeah, it doesn't mean that I agree with all their decisions as they're going through what are a lot of procedural decisions, because I absolutely don't. It doesn't mean that I don't think that it isn't politicized, and I don't think that there are problems with it, because I do. But that's a really good sign. A couple weeks ago, who came out of the blue to defend the free press? Senator Ted Cruz. That's not a bad thing to have in your back pocket, right? So when we really start stretching the bounds of our democracy, we're having some of these, what I would say, red flags just pop up, kind of cautionary signs, which gives me hope that you have actually elected officials that aren't too fearful of President Trump, because they absolutely are afraid of him and they won't stand up to him. But we also have Republicans in our cities and our communities that really know deep down this is not okay, and we can't allow this to continue.
Do you talk to Republicans about trying to get them to come out and say something about how unacceptable turning the American military loose in U.S. cities is?
Oh, absolutely. My dad's a Republican. And when this first started happening, I mean, he was in the military. This man has served more than 30 years in military service. And he sends me, text messages talking about, oh my gosh, Posse Comitatus Act, right? This is real common sense stuff. But it is things that I think we've taken for granted in society, right? Because we've had the fortune, frankly, we've had the fortune and the privilege living in the United States where having the military on our streets has not been a reality for us. It's not the same when you go to a third world country. Anyone who's traveled through an airport and sees the visual presence of what it's like to live in an authoritarian country, it's a very different existence, and that can never become a reality for us.
Certainly seems like that's something that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller want to acclimate people to, don't you think?
It certainly feels that way. It certainly feels that way. I really want to believe that that is not the case. But every day that goes by, every press conference that goes by, I mean, the things that stick out to me in the last week is really the accumulation of all of those press stops where the president actively talks about using the military for purposes that are expressly prohibited. And then, moreover, boldly to absolutely all of the top brass in our United States military services, talks about how he wants to train them in our cities. Just imagine if any Democratic president had ever said that stuff, we would all lose our minds.
So right now we are waiting on an appeals court to render a judgment, right? What do you expect from the appeals court exactly?
Yeah, and so right now, for those who haven't really been tracking it, you get a temporary restraining order. That's like this immediate thing where you get in front of a judge to kind of pause the actions, kind of preserve the status quo, if you will. And that's what we have in place. We have 2 temporary restraining orders, effectively telling the president, hey, you don't get to bring the National Guard into Oregon. You haven't met those conditions. The federal government is trying to take those temporary restraining orders, elevate them to the Ninth Circuit, and then place a pause on those orders, well, effectively what we would call a stay, which would allow the president to continue with moving the National Guard into Oregon. And so we expect in the next, probably 24 to 48 hours, the ruling will say whether or not we're going to move forward with that stay. The federal government has asked for that to happen by the end of, I believe it is today. So we're hopeful to hear back that no, we're not going to move forward, and they will not grant the federal government's motions. And then we'll continue with the typical legal process, which you start moving towards the ultimate decision on the merits of the case. Again, this was a temporary quick order to allow the court to really process the full facts on the ground and make a fully informed decision to what we believe is a ruling that will pause the president's actions trying to mobilize the military in Oregon.
Now, to be clear, though, even if the government were to get a stay on the temporary restraining order, you guys still will have won that first round in court, because the judge did say that they expect you to prevail in the long run, correct?
That's right. And the wonky things, to get a temporary restraining order, to get a preliminary injunction, these are kind of these early motions. It's an incredibly high bar to get that. You have to show a likelihood of prevailing on the merits of the case. You have to show irreparable harm. Two really high burdens to prove in a court. And we've done that twice now, twice in 1 week. So the likelihood of us moving forward, again, presenting more facts, I expect the outcome to remain the same over the long term.
Just to wrap this up, the judge also issued a strong denunciation of Trump that I'd like to quote. "This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law." AG, that's what's at stake here, I think. Do you expect this to go to the Supreme Court, and how do you predict the Supreme Court will handle the underlying issues?
The optimist in me says, hey, there's nothing to see here. And the Supreme Court will sit there and say, hey, the lower court judge got it right. And I really do believe the lower court judge got it right. She's very thoughtful, was in the weeds, understands what's at stake. I think the Supreme Court, even if it makes it to them, will understand what's at stake here in America. And again, sometimes even having a Supreme Court rule on our favor might be what this country needs to see, to really know that, hey, even this conservative court, even this judge appointed by Trump sees it differently. And we shouldn't need that in society right now. But because we are so polarized, because we have politicians, both sides, that continue to push the polarization, it's tough for people to know really who to trust. And so to have some of these validators, to have that judge that's more conservative appointed by Trump rule in favor and kind of talk philosophically, and not philosophically, practically about what our democracy means is incredibly important right now in these times. I just wish more people would listen.
I hope you're right. I just want to ask, though, do you think the Supreme Court sees it the way we see it? Does the Supreme Court's conservatives, the majority, do they think we're at a precipice moment where things like that are required?
I believe all 9 of those justices believe that. I believe all 9 of those justices understand the reality of where we are in America right now. I don't think you can walk through, read, pick up a newspaper, and have any other opinion. And so I really do believe that when some of these really significant cases get to them, they're going to take a strong look at them, and they're going to do what's right ultimately. I can't believe that they don't see what all of us are seeing right now. They're incredibly well-educated, smart judges.
Attorney General, really hope you're right. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.